Hi, everyone. I'm Iran Reznikov, partner at Vintage. I drank 2 gin and tonics, so I'm a happy camper. I'm very, very excited to host you today. So we have here Dick Costolo, the former CEO of Twitter, managing partner and co-founder of O1 Advisors, and Josh Kopelman, founder partner of First Round. And I thought to do something a bit different today. Maybe I can ask a question for Josh about Dick and a question for Dick about Josh. So let's make it a bit more interesting. I want to ask Josh. Okay, Josh, you've seen Dick operate both in the trenches and at scale, and maybe you can also kind of elaborate on that. What's a decision that he made that is memorable to you and that you think other founders should learn from?
So I first met Dick when he started FeedBurner. Was that 2005? 2004. But if I had to say, the thing that I'm most impressed by was some of the work he did at Twitter on developing talent. And so if you're a founder, there are robust networks of advice. There are other founders. You're in WhatsApp groups with them. You have angel investors. I'm good. Gives double fisting a new meaning. There are angel investors. You have venture investors. There's a lot of people to give advice. But I think what Dick realized, or at least what we saw outside watching Dick at Twitter, was that if you are an engineer and you get promoted to an engineering manager, or if you're a sales rep and you get promoted to a sales manager, there is no network of advice, and much of the time you're figuring it out by yourself and you're figuring it out wrong. So what we saw Dick do at Twitter was basically build an entire curriculum, and we don't see, like, we've partnered with hundreds of founders starting companies, and we rarely see the level of investment in training for those first-time managers. And Dick just built a whole curriculum on how to manage, I believe it was. Yep. And it's something that we were really inspired by at First Round. And so we realized that while Twitter had the scale to do that, a lot of our companies did not have the scale. So we didn't do it nearly as well as Dick did, but we tried to build a curriculum so our founders could send their first-time engineering managers, first-time sales managers, first-time product leaders, when they were in terms of managing people, to try to provide some counseling and some professional development. And I thought that Dick investing the time at that at Twitter was really meaningful.
That's amazing. And maybe a question for Dick about Josh. What's something about Josh's approach to backing founders that you really appreciated?
Well, first of all, I'll say 2 things. One, my favorite thing about Josh and Noah, and I've known Noah for 20 years, and he has had the Israeli flag hanging in his office for that long, alongside a slightly smaller Chicago Cubs flag that he has in his office. But these 2 guys are the same people they were when they got started, which is, as you may or may not know, super rare in Silicon Valley. My chairman of the board at Twitter, Jack Dorsey, was a super clean-cut, normal, nice dude from St. Louis when we got started, and now he's a crypto guy with a really long rabbinical beard surfing in Costa Rica. So it's very rarely the case that these people are the same people they were before they, made it. And Josh and Noah both are. Secondly, the thing that I learned from Josh about investing is when we used to go into investment committee and we would go around the table and ask everyone what they thought about a deal, it became obvious that once we started discussing the company, that people would change their minds and go along with whoever spoke first. We have a bunch of charismatic, forceful speakers in the room, and one of them says, I really love her for this reason, and 2 of the associates changed their mind without telling anybody. So what Josh did, and I didn't know this until we got started on a second fund, is everyone has to fill out a rubric about what they think about the company along a bunch of different axes before the meeting, so you know where everybody stands before going into the room. And at least if you don't want to expose those before you go into the room, you can see them afterwards and know where they stood at the beginning of the meeting. It's perfectly fine to change your mind, but let's all understand where everyone is going into the meeting. And we do that now, and it's a much healthier and livelier discussion because you know, of course, where the associates stand. And if they don't like it, you can turn around and ask them, you completely disagree with Adam, why do you disagree with him, et cetera.
That's amazing, kind of creating a white space for people to express their opinion
yeah,
without
and actually one of the things I talked about in my management class at Twitter to complete the circle here is, you have status as a manager over the people who are reporting to you. And you have to just assume in a discussion where you want them to disagree with you, if they disagree with you, you have to give them the right and the ability and the space to do that. If you go into every one of your staff meetings and you speak first, instead of asking what does everyone think about this, they're just going to go, well, Dick's already decided, so it doesn't do any good to disagree with it, et cetera.
That's a great trait for a CEO to have or a manager to have, and maybe that's a good segue for a question for Josh. What's a trait in founders that investors consistently overestimate or underestimate when they make the investment decision?
So it's hard to generalize to all investors. There are lots of, there's a wide lens there. I think what we could talk about is something we've learned, which is, our investment process is typically we have a partner spend time with a founder, and then that founder comes into a partner meeting. And he or she will present for 45 minutes to an hour, and then we discuss it afterwards. And when I look back at some of our biggest misses and mistakes in the partner meeting, it comes, if I had to say, it's because initially we viewed our investment decision as a vote on the founder's performance over 45 minutes. So we over-indexed on presentation skills, and we under-indexed on all of the work that he or she did for the months coming into the partner meeting, right? So there was one time where someone just gave a bad performance in a partner meeting. They didn't have clarity of thinking. They maybe gave long answers instead of short answers. Yet, when you actually look at the work that they did, it was impressive, the speed to revenue, the passionate and excited customers. And we said no to that company because we believed that storytelling was such an important part of being a founder. And we've really now tried to revise the rubric that Dick talked about because, yes, you have to be able to tell stories to raise money, to hire people, to get customers. But if someone's going to have spent 5 months on a company before they come in, you probably should weigh their performance during those 5 months a little more than their performance during 45 minutes in a partner meeting.
Yeah, most definitely. Maybe we can kind of switch gears and Dick, obviously a lot of CEOs feel pressure to manage their investors. What's the right balance between kind of being honest about things?
Well, yeah. I mean, nothing's worse than being dishonest about things. You just have, you should always, what I like is, and I did as CEO of Twitter, is just communicate super, super frequently. Just always be communicating. Bob Iger at Disney used to send, Sheryl Sandberg was on his board for a while, and she was talking to me when she was on his board. So Bob Iger would send out messages to the board like maybe even a couple times a day. But there would just be like a bullet point or two. It wasn't like, here's the 9-page update for the quarter. It was just, hey, just a heads up, I'm having some issues with Disney Cruise Lines, and I'm working on it. Might see something in the press in the next few weeks. And also, blah, 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 movies getting ready to come out. We think it's going to do really well. Whatever. And that kind of stuff gives the boards like, if you're on his board at that point, you're super comfortable. It's informal, it's relaxed. You're never going, what's Bob hiding from me? So I tried to do stuff like that all the time. And you should always be communicating as a CEO. It's just good hygiene. I think what CEOs underestimate is to be perfectly frank, if the company's going well, is the leverage they have with their investors. Nothing is more stressful for a CEO than everything's going great and they're fundraising and it's a growth round and everyone wants super pro rata and the lead wants to take the whole round and the total adds up to 150% of the available capital. And the CEO ends up doing things like, well, I guess I'll dilute myself more or raise more money. You don't have to do that. Like I always tell the CEOs, like just write your investors back and say, hey man, you have to think about this like a wedding seating chart. As long as everybody is equally disappointed, that's the best I can do, and you're only going to get X, Y, Z. And I just don't think CEOs realize they have the capacity and ability to do that with their investors, and so that and the investors have been through this 50 times, so they're like, how could you do this to me? I got you that $25,000 contract, and they think they underestimate the ability and leverage they have with their investors.
Do you see a difference between kind of first-time founders and serial? So
of course.
You have a room here with first-time founders as well. Like, what's the tactically?
How
do you help them?
I'll give you a quick personal extreme example that I don't recommend you do right away, but it's what happened. When I took over as CEO of Twitter after being there for a year, there were 14, 15 people in the boardroom, and it was only a Series C company. And I actually started off the first board meeting, my first board meeting as CEO, jokingly saying, I'd like to welcome all the board members, all the board observers, and the uninvited guests, because people would bring like 2 or 3 people with them. And so
don't recommend doing that.
I don't really, no, that's not the part I don't recommend. In 2011, I decided there's nobody in the room who can really help me at hyper scale that we're going through. And I told all the investors and VCs in the room, I'm going to change the board from one of investment to one of governance, and you can't come to the board meetings anymore because I'm changing the boardroom. And we did that. John Doerr left the board. These are all great investors. John Doerr left the board. Fred Wilson left the board. Bijan Sabeh from Spark left the board. And there was one investor who will remain nameless who was like, I'm not leaving. And I just said, okay, I'm going to change the location of the board meeting and not tell you where it is.
So this part you don't recommend, just for...
Yeah, that's the part I don't recommend.
Okay, thank you.
We could do it because we were Twitter and we're able to do that. But you have more capacity to deal with your board than you think you do, and don't let them push you around, I guess is what I would say. Curious,
Josh, what do you think from your perspective?
Yeah, so we tend to invest at the seed stage, and at the seed stage, the board really, yes, it's a governance device. We don't need a board seat. There are plenty of times if a founder wants us on the board, we'll serve in a common seat, because we're not looking to control their company. If we're looking to have like governance control at the seed stage, it's a mistake.
But what's the most important thing when you create a relationship with a founder between you and as an investor and founder?
Obviously the word trust and respect is important. I think, look, I don't know if this joke will land because of kosher, but like when if you have eggs and bacon for breakfast, I'd say like the chicken was involved, but the pig was fully committed to that meal. And so...
I'm not sure I'm following. Maybe it's the gin, but I don't know.
They'll tell you later.
Thank you.
So I think it's important to recognize as a VC, and when I hire partners, to recognize who's the chicken and who's the pig. Yeah. Who is fully committed to this startup, and VCs are chickens.
I see a lot of LinkedIn posts tomorrow about the chicken
Chatham
and the
House
pig.
rules. Chatham House rules.
God.
So, look, so I think that the important thing is as an investor at a seed stage is to realize that you're backing that founder and that founder's vision of what he or she wants to build. I think the single best thing that I've seen early stage investors add at the board table are the right questions, not the answers. And I think when the VC gives the best question, it gives the founder maybe a new way of thinking about things, and they come back with the right answer, and that's often the best relationship, rather than the VC who just like parachutes in, spits off those answers, and then goes off to another board because they don't have the context.
Yeah, I love that. Dick, founders often try to pattern match great stories, but patterns can be illusions.
Yeah.
What's a lesson you learned that turned out to be an unrepeatable one?
Yeah, this is a great question. unfortunately, or it's just the way of the world, these books get written sometimes by founders and CEOs and sometimes about them. And they're largely, in many cases, all the problems and all the warts are left out, and you've got this mythology. I'll give you a specific example. Back before he was ripped and going to Paris Fashion Week, we tried to get Jeff Bezos to join the board of Twitter in like 2013. And because we were like, who's the best possible independent director? And we thought it would be him. And Jack and I went to see him. Jack was the chairman of the board while I was CEO. We went to see him, and he asked a question about strategy, like help me understand the strategy of how you're thinking about the company in 24 months. And Jack said, well, Steve Jobs, used to say that the most important thing about strategy was saying no, and that every company should do few things, and it's the job of the executive team to be an editor and remove things. And Bezos looked at him and went, oh yeah? Well, I like to do everything. He goes, and he does that big Jeff Bezos laugh and goes, my team has to talk me out of stuff. And he told a couple stories about things he was doing that were off the original mission, but that he was excited about. And he looked at me and Jack and he said, there are lots of different ways to be successful. And if you try to be someone you're not, or run a company that's not your style of running the company or not true to your personality, when things go wrong, as they inevitably do, you'll be standing there on stage, frozen because, now what do? I don't know what I'm supposed to do because I'm running the Steve Jobs playbook instead of the Jack Dorsey playbook. So you got to be yourself and understand that there are a million different ways to be successful, and don't try to pattern match against something you've seen or that somebody told you to do.
What's the best advice on kind of finding your own voice as a CEO if it's your first rodeo show?
Yeah, I used to, again, I'll pull something from my management class that Josh graciously talked about. I always just would say, don't pretend you know the answer when you don't know the answer. One of the things I do in founder pitches, I try to ask a question that I'm pretty sure they don't know the answer to. And there are a lot of CEOs who will just start talking instead of saying, oh, that's a great question, I don't know. I'll go ask so-and-so. They'll just start talking, and I guess they think that maybe I'll stumble into the answer as I go, or I'll talk my way around it. And when you do that as a CEO or a manager or a director, anywhere in the organization, if you think your people are fooled, they're not fooled. Everyone knows, you don't know what you're talking about. It's not your job as the CEO to be omniscient. It's your job to make sure the decisions get made. It's not your job to make all the decisions, et cetera.
That's a great one. Building big versus exiting early. This is a dilemma that a lot of Israeli founders face. Obviously, we have a lot of exits here. Josh, when you're trying to build a generational company, but also need to remain attractive for potential strategic conversations, how do you avoid sending kind of mixed signals internally to the board and externally?
So I'm not sure I get the question, because if you're trying to build a generational company, you're going long. Like the preface of that question is, if you're trying to build a generational company, you're going all in. We funded hundreds of companies over the last 21 years, and maybe 10 have truly emerged as generational. And so I could give the answer for those 10, which is just keep going all in. Dave Baszucki was the founder of Roblox. We were fortunate enough to back him in the seed round. And Roblox as a company, for the first 9 years of that company's life, the entire valuation of the company never crossed $100 million. For 9 years. He was eating glass. And yet he believed, and by the way, Zynga called him and wanted to buy him, and I think even Dell was talking to him. No interest. He just had faith that he was going to build a generational company. It brought up echoes of what David said a little bit about that level of confidence and the willingness to just believe in yourself irrationally. And after the 9th anniversary, the company quickly went from being worth under 100 million to being worth over 30 billion. And if you're going to build a generational company, you have to actually have the fortitude to turn down. There's no one that's built a $30 billion company that hasn't turned down the $500 million offer, the $2 billion offer, the $10 billion offer along the way. And the thing you do to build enterprise value versus is this exact same. Now, if you're one of the other companies, the hundreds of other companies where you might, when you go to sleep at night, you might not truly think you're building. You could very well build a successful company that could have life-changing outcome for you, for your team, for your investors, deliver great value for customers. And in those cases, maybe the answer might be a little different. In those cases, you are seeking to sort of understand potential acquirers' interest levels, where you might intersect strategically. It might impact your roadmap in terms of products you develop and launch. But I think it's really hard to I think you need to disambiguate between generational company and not.
So when is the right moment?
One of the things that Josh just said that also leads back to a characteristic that I think investors underappreciate or underestimate, at least in pitch meetings, is resilience. You have to be, and we heard it about earlier. Things will go wrong repeatedly, and you have to be resilient enough to adapt and zig when the market zags and get through that. So one of the things that I always look for is, does this person really have a chip on their shoulder, and they're going to be able to push through during the multiple storms that are going to come along? Because if you're building a generational company, you're going to go through those super, super lows multiple times. And there will be offers during those times to, hey, you can end all this right now and, work here for a couple of years and go away. And the great founders don't do that.
So how do you identify resilience by
identifying
hard. A chip over
It's
over
hard
the shoulder?
because, we actually brought in this person to our firm who is a cognitive psychologist, and he evaluates hockey players and college football players to see if they'll be successful in the pros. And he's got this test that he basically gives them that's like, I'll just summarize is this person a winner or not? Are they going to push through and go the extra yard? And we blindly gave him 4 of our CEOs, 2 that were running companies that were, not going to make it, and 2 of our best CEOs, and said, guess which, divide the 4 correctly based on your test, and he totally got it wrong. It was one great, as badly as you could get it, he got it. And it's because when you're interviewing these founders, there's crazy good and there's crazy. Sometimes you'll have a CEO who you'll tell them something and they'll be like, no, that's not what's going to happen. It's going to be like this. And sometimes, they're ahead of you and they figure it out. And sometimes they're ignoring reality in the face of all evidence. And it's tough to figure out, especially at seed and A when you're investing. It's hard to distinguish between crazy good and crazy in that early life of the company. So it's something we try to interview for, but it's really, you just get it wrong sometimes. Look, there are people like Evan Spiegel at Snapchat who was turned down by tons of investors because this guy's a lunatic, and built an amazing company.
Josh, any words of wisdom around how to identify resilience?
Look, it's so hard. I think at the seed stage in particular, like a founder trying to build a generational company is like someone sitting on their couch saying, I want to summit Everest. Right. And there are lots of people who sit on their couch and never get off their couch. But when you think about actually what it takes to summit Everest, right? You have years of training and outfitting and big cost, and then you got to get to base camp. Yeah. And by the way, 95% of the people who think about summiting Everest never get to base camp. And then when you at base camp, you go up to up, and then you have to go back down to acclimatize, and you're going up and down all the way up to 4 camps, and then finally you're going to summit, and the weather on the day that you attempt to summit is unknowable. And so when you sit down and say, when someone comes to us and says, this is the expedition we want to build, there's no ability at seed stage to predict what the weather is going to be like on the day they attempt to summit Everest 10 years from now. So we underwrite base camp. As a seed stage investor, for us, base camp is, can they get to product market fit? Will they get to 5 million in revenue? You know, you could sit down and say, like, even that is hard to underwrite at the seed stage. But that's what we send to underwrite, because if we could build a positively selected basket of all people that get to base camp, there will be a lot of amazing entrepreneurs who succeed in summiting the mountain.
Amazing. Thank you so much
Thanks.
for coming here in Israel and supporting us.
Happy to do it. Thanks, everybody.